Hello and welcome. As has been said, I'm Rosamund Urwin, a columnist at the London Evening Standard, but we're not really interested in me today. Far more important is for me to introduce the panel. And to my left is Jo Swinson, the Liberal Democrat Minister and Member of Parliament for East Dunbartonshire. Jo is both Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Employment Relations, Consumer and Postal Affairs, I hope that's right, as well as a Junior Equalities Minister, which is obviously much of what we're going to touch on today. And I believe you're the first MP born in the 80s to enter the House of Commons. There's your useless fan. There we go. And then we'll hear from Stella Creasy, MP for Walthamstow since 2010, and a scourge of payday loan companies who's taken on Wonga and its ilk, and earlier this year also waged war on Twitter trolls. And most brilliantly of all, managed to embarrass the unembarrassable Toby Young on Newsnight for his tweeting about a female MP's cleavage. And finally, let me welcome Liz Truss, the Conservative MP for South West Norfolk since 2010. Last year, she was made Parliamentary Under Secretary of State with responsibility for education and childcare in the Department for Education. So the format, we'll have about 6 minutes speeches from our three panel members, and then that will be followed by a question and answer session. And we're going to cover their sort of personal journeys to Parliament, their motivations, and how they've adapted their roles. And then we'll look at sort of challenges for women and whether those are similar things to the ones their male colleagues face, or if there are sort of unique challenges for women in getting into Parliament, and how we get more women to get in Parliament, and also the messages we want to give to young women thinking about a career there. The couple of the House rules, and then we'll push on. The event's on the record, so anything, we've got a video and podcast available on the website swiftly afterwards. So anything you do say here can be used as evidence against you, I suppose. And if you're on Twitter, please get tweeting. We've got all our Twitter handles here. The hashtag is Women Leaders. And please copy in the IFG's Twitter handle as well, which is hopefully here as well. Yep, at IFG Events. I think that's everything. So I'll ask Jo to kick off.
Sure. Thanks very much indeed, Ros. And I'm delighted to be here today because getting more women into leadership positions within politics, both in elected politics in Parliament and in government, and also within the civil service, is something which I'm very passionate about, because I think bluntly we'll get better decisions, we'll get better policy made, and we'll get better implementation, because having diversity within teams, I don't think I'm preaching to an audience here that needs any convincing on that front, is a better recipe for success. I never set out to be a politician. I was at school very intrigued by studying business and getting involved in young enterprise, and went off to university to study management, and I did so at the LSE. But I'd been interested in politics as a sort of hobby, and I did a bit of debating and public speaking stuff at school, and so when I arrived at the Freshers' Fair at LSE in 1997, having already kind of worked out that I was a Lib Dem, to the extent that I stayed up on election night, having been not quite old enough to vote in the 97 election, and cheered on the Liberal Democrats, wondering as the results came through things like, where on earth is North Avon? But basically, I'd worked out I was a Lib Dem, but you know, it was just something that didn't seem very central to my life. But I saw this couple of blokes sitting there at a table at the Freshers' Fair, looking slightly forlorn, trying to sign people up to the Lib Dems, and all the other stalls around them to get people signed up to the Salsa Club or the Underground Dance Music Society had kind of pumping music, and there was much more kind of buzz going on. But I thought, well, I am a Lib Dem, I'm signing up to lots of societies, I may as well join. And it was really from then on that things started to snowball, and I got involved in the youth organisation, and then was asked if I wanted to become a party trainer and go to conferences, and sort of one thing led to another. And then somebody said to me, and this was a few years later, by the time I was just about to graduate, well, have you ever thought of standing for Parliament? And I kind of thought, well, no, not really. And then I thought, but you know, it could be quite a fun experience. I could learn a lot of new skills, and you know, I don't really want to win, but hey, as a Liberal Democrat, that's not really a problem. interesting against the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, John Prescott. That was the election where he threw the infamous punch, but he'd obviously heard that I was from Glasgow, and therefore didn't dare pull anything like that on me. And basically loved the experience so much. I took holiday from work so that I could campaign in the afternoons and evenings and just work mornings. And the contrast for me was really, really important. I realised that much more fun than being a marketing manager to try and basically get more people to listen to Viking FN rather than Galaxy, where they both played the same music pretty much anyway. The campaigning that I was doing, getting out there and speaking to people, both in Hull but also in the area where I lived, which was just about 20 miles away in the Holton Price and Howden constituency, where I was vice chair of the local party. That was something which I found I was much more passionate about. And it was at that election that I thought, well, you know, maybe next time I want to stand somewhere where it's not guaranteed that the Liberal Democrats are not going to win. And so after the election I started looking at where I might be able to stand. And to cut a long story short, the seat where I grew up had boundary changes, which meant that it was a prospect for the Lib Dems. It was still a Labour seat, but it was suddenly a bit more marginal. And it just seemed to me at that point where I was thinking about what I would want to do, that if I didn't go for that opportunity then, it was one of those things that I would always look back and think, what would that have been like? So I quit my job, moved back home, literally had to move back home, which at 22, 23 was a bit of a culture shock, I think for me and my parents at the time, and had to get a new job in Glasgow and continue doing marketing for a small business there, and got elected in 2005. But it was really interesting when I've spoken to some of my male colleagues that their paths have often been quite different, whereas when I speak to my female colleagues, one of the key things that is much more common is that they're there because somebody asked them to stand. And, you know, I think maybe women are just less likely to wake up in the morning one day and think, oh, I'd be good as an MP. And it's not to say that doesn't happen to any women, because I've also got women colleagues where that has been the case. But I think there is a bit of a gender difference there. I then had 5 years as an opposition MP, which, and having been the youngest MP in the House when I was elected in 2005 at the age of 25, I remember sort of thinking, well, maybe I am only 25, maybe if I'm lucky and I continue in politics, maybe I will in my lifetime see the Liberal Democrats in government. Didn't really, count on the fact that would be the situation 5 years later when we had that election, which had such odd results around the country. I remember the election night felt very bizarre, having had some kind of plague mania, and then we lost seats, and then there was results in lots of different areas that didn't seem to fit some kind of national pattern. So we then ended up in the coalition negotiations, and obviously I became Vince's private parliamentary secretary, and then the same role for Nick Clegg as Deputy Prime Minister. And what again that I found was interesting was the way in which people get on in politics, and there is, I think, another gender difference in how men and women approach the prospect of promotion. And one of the things that was really interesting for me was that my husband got elected as an MP in 2010. He wasn't we were together, and then we got married in 2011. And just the way that he would approach Prime Minister's questions, or that he would approach, he said, well, you should go and see Nick about wanting to become a minister. And I said, well, I'm not sure that I'm ready to become a minister yet. And he said, yes, but by the time you are, he'll be into the reshuffle, and so you probably have to get the conversation in early, even if you don't feel that's the situation you're at yet. And it was such a different way of looking at things. Again, when I speak to my female colleagues, I think there is much less initial appetite to go and have that discussion with the party leader and say, I would really like to serve in this way, I think I'll be able to do this job or that job, and I hope you'll consider me when you're making your decisions. Whereas the blokes do it all the time. And I think the way that politics is perhaps less of a meritocracy than some other careers, where you don't have the same continuous personal development, you don't have the same HR structures, you don't have the same recruitment processes, where people are assessed on a range of different factors. It's much more who is visible, who's gone and asked for something, who's said they're keen. That is how a lot of those decisions are made. And probably some of that we're not going to get away from, but I think that is also an area where there's a gendered difference. And then the final point that I'll just make, which I perhaps know less about, but will shortly find out a little bit more about, is I think there is a real difference about the the issues of childcare for women and for men. And it strikes me that there's lots and lots of men that get elected to Parliament in their kind of early to mid-30s. It's a really, really common time when people have perhaps been, worked somewhere else for a bit and then they've decided to pursue a political career, or maybe they've been fighting a seat for 2 or 3 elections. And actually, we lose loads of women from being candidates, certainly in my party, and I'm sure it's the case in other parties too, where they perhaps stand in their 20s and then at the point at which they think of having a family, they go, well, I'm just going to sit a couple of elections out because I just don't have the extra capacity to devote when I've got a job, I've got kids. I don't have the extra time to devote to being a parliamentary candidate on top of all of that. And therefore, I don't think, again, I've got a magic answer, but I think part of this is a really interesting element about actually the role of men in looking after children as well, because it is still the case that the vast majority of the caring responsibilities fall to women. And while that is the scenario, I think that will mean that we lose out on women who don't even enter Parliament. I suspect it's actually probably a bit easier to do if you're in Parliament when that's actually happening. And all credit to Liz for fighting a selection and fighting an election while already being a mum. I think that is something which is probably incredibly difficult to do. And as I say, I don't think I've got all the answers yet, so I'm greedily getting tips and advice from others, and no doubt one of those people will be Liz. So I hope that's given some pause for thought, and I look forward to questions after hearing from Stella and Liz.
Thanks. Well, I'll just hand over to Stella then. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this. I don't think I can claim a backstory like Joe's that has fighting, presumably, to get Billy Bragg and the wedding present played in Hull, surely, as some of the great progressive campaigners. Mine is really, and I often say to people, there was a kind of pinnacle point for me which involved sheep and baby cows. I had always been very involved in campaigns as a young person, and therefore I would always say I'd been very political and very passionate about politics. I didn't necessarily make the link. One of my great campaigning lessons in life was helping lead the baby milk action campaign in my school and managing to persuade them to remove all the Nestle chocolate from the chocolate machine. And it was a great lesson for me, because never ever in a girls' school get all the chocolate removed and not have a strategy for what happens next. You lose the argument incredibly quickly with people. But actually then, round about my 16, 17, a lot of my friends were involved in the campaign, and this really will age me as somebody who was not born in the 1980s, the campaign around live animal exports. And a lot of them were getting up very early in the morning, going onto the docks and shouting at crates of sheep and baby cows. At the same time, the local Labour Party was saying, well, we've got local elections coming up. If we win, we will have control of the rules around the local port. And we could say that this port would not accept live animal exports. And there was a light bulb moment for me as a kind of 16, 17-year-old about the connection between political movements and the issues that I was concerned about. And I remember trying to argue with my friends about, well, hang on a minute, we're saying what we want to do is stop them. Why don't we stop it locally? That would send a message. And as a 16 and 17-year-old, being incredibly frustrated with people who said, no, it was more important to go and shout at sheep and shout at baby cows than necessarily to go and deal with decision makers. Now, I believe throughout life you need people who will both shout at sheep and baby cows and engage with decision making and indeed make decisions. But it was a moment for me where the connection between the things that I cared about and political movements was kind of made very real. And from then onwards, I started getting very involved in my local Labour Party. I have to say, at that point, I was living in Colchester, so I did genuinely believe that it was only myself, my parents, and Billy Bragg as the socialist who lived in Essex. It was quite a small gene pool to pull from. And kind of stayed involved. I didn't do student politics. I made a very conscious decision that although during the general election in '97, when I was old enough to vote, I would help campaign, I wanted to enjoy being a student. I rather foolishly thought I would get involved in local government because that would be more serious and grown up than student politics. What I realised then subsequently as a chief whip on a hung council was there were people on my local authority who would say, in 1975, he said this about me on planning, I will never forgive him. And you'd think, let it go, just let it go. And at least in student politics, people tended to leave after 3 or 4 years, get a sense of perspective, kind of eventually make friends again with people. I really enjoyed being a local councillor. I loved working within the community that I lived in. By that point, I was living in Walthamstow, or God's own country, as I like to call it, working with people, being inspired by the ideas that they had for dealing with the challenges that we had in our local community and the potential of the local population to do things. But I was also writing a PhD and working to fund writing a PhD. And I hit a moment of, I'm coming to the end of my 20s, I've not seen much of it. I wanted to have a different work-life balance. So I stood down from being a local councillor in 2006, took a full-time job in the kind of research field that I was in. There was a choice for me between what I would call arm chewers, which was the meetings that you were asked to go to as a local councillor, where I would willingly chew my own arm off to leave early, and that sense of the campaign, the community activism, the point where power really could be generated by participation that was very strong to me. So I had fully intended to do a lot more grassroots activism, to enjoy community organising, to be part of the Labour movement in that sense, to help with some of the arguments about how you reconnect people to power. Then my local MP said he was standing down. It was my home, it was the community that I knew best. To be very honest about this, the first time when I heard that he was standing down, I burst into tears because I was frightened. I was frightened about being able to make the case to the community and to my local party about representation. I still did it. And I think I would accredit that to having grown up in a family where my mother and my father pushed both me and my brother to be passionate and committed about what we wanted to do. And my mum always says to me, even if you're scared of something, walk into a room like you're wearing a metaphorical top hat and high heels, where you are the tallest, most confident person in the room. And that kind of attitude and that ethos, that there was no difference between my brother and myself in terms of what we could achieve, I think has been, the more and more I look at this issue, the more and more I talk to people, has been absolutely crucial. So Creasy is on Twitter. You will see her often telling me that I'm late for things, or that my hair doesn't look right, or that really she's had a conversation with somebody, because she lives in Walthamstow too now, but she's been an amazing inspiration to me as a former head teacher about the capacity of women to lead. And I don't think until I got into public life myself, I realised how comparatively unusual that was. Having been selected, it has been fascinating to me to be part of Parliament as opposed to local government. And I think we need to be clear that the things that we're talking about in terms of political leadership are not issues alone in Parliament. What I call the 80-20 society exists across a whole range of fields in our society in terms of women's representation. So whilst we have come a long way from the days when Herbert Asquith released rabbits into Parliament, because the idea of giving votes to women was like giving votes to rabbits, it was equally inhuman and insane, we still have a long way to go with dealing with people's expectations about what role women can play in our public life and across fields in public life, not just in business, but in the media, in academia, in the military, both in terms of their involvement at all and in leadership roles. It is an 80-20 balance. One of the most fascinating studies to me is one that shows that if you have a room which has 20% women in, men will think it's 50-50. And I think Parliament represents that role. And one of the things I feel very frustrated by is often there's an unconscious expectation that we're there now. We've kind of got equality. That actually, look, there are women there. I can see them. You're wearing different colours in Parliament. We've kind of seen you on TV. Like job done. Equality is going to happen. Equality is not guaranteed at all. That it is still too often seen as a conversation that we need to be having. So we're the ones who need to work out why not more women are coming forward, why we're not making progress on that 20 to 30 to 40 to 50%, is every single challenge to me. And the one thing I would say about this conversation is it's the only place where I hate the fact that we're meeting the Bechdel test. Anybody here know what the Bechdel test is? The Bechdel test, if you don't know, is a great film test, and there's been 2 films this year that I've been to see that I would absolutely recommend you go and see that match it. One is Iron Man 2, and the other is Kick-Ass 2. And believe me, if you do nothing this year, go and see Kick-Ass 2 and then think about women's representation. The Bechdel test is whether you have 2 women on screen at any one time talking to each other about something other than a man. That's why only 2 films this year, as far as I'm aware, have met that test. Actually, when you start applying that to our politics, the 80-20 society means that we might get invited along, but we'll still be talking to men. We'll still be there because then they can say, we've done equality, we've got a woman on the panel, job done. And we have to change the argument that this is a conversation about women and how many women you have in a room to a conversation about power and where is power distributed. 80-20 is also the Pareto principle for those of you who are economists in the room. Power is unequally distributed in our society, the outcome of which is that we're not getting the potential and the contribution that women can make. Therefore, it is absolutely everybody's challenge. It's not just our challenge to get this right. And we have to change that discourse that says it's for us to figure out why, still in our generation, questions around childcare are seen as women's issues. I'll give you a great example of this. When Louise Mensch stood down, I was deluged with phone calls from journalists. And I had to say to them, and they were both men and women, and including your paper, I'm afraid, Rosamund.
Yeah, no.
And they rang me up and they said, could you give us a comment on, does this mean that women can't have it all? I said, I'll stop you there. Number one, I don't have children. Number two, my partner isn't working abroad. Number three, I don't write trashy novels. I don't even know Louise very well. Like, I'm not even in her party. Why are you ringing me? And they were like, isn't this really about women's struggle? I said, here you go. Here's a list of 5 of my male colleagues who all have young families. Ring them, ask them their experience. And you know what? I checked with all those 5 male colleagues. Not a one of them got a phone call. So all of these conversations right now should not be Bechdel tests. It's the only arena in which actually we should be asking, where are the men talking about the fact they're missing out the contribution? Because too often we've made this about how many women you've got in the room rather than the impact it makes when you have a range of voices talking and interacting together. I know throughout my career, throughout my campaigning, I've learned huge amounts from working with men. And I hope I've made an impact on them too. It's that combination that Britain needs. It's the combination of everyone contributing that we're missing out on when we have an unequal society. And that's what we've got to crack. In terms of doing that, though, we have to deal with the Haileman-Okamoto problem. And I don't know if anyone's seen that research that shows if women put themselves forward, people hate them for being aggressive. If they hold themselves back, nobody notices them. The only way we're going to change that is if a lot of women start putting themselves forward, so it becomes a commonplace issue, and we start calling out men who find it challenging and difficult when women have an opinion. It's really difficult to do that. Calling out somebody who's being sexist, calling out somebody who's using inappropriate language, because we're conditioned to go, I'm sorry, I'm making a fuss, but, is really, really difficult. The only way we can do that is we help each other to do that. So actually, one of the things I would love for everyone out here today to do is go away, and when you see somebody getting that kind of talk, when you see somebody not being put forward, support them, cheerlead them, and call out the person holding them back, because they're letting you down because we're missing out on what they can do. I'd love to hear what Liz is going to say. I've been really interested by what Joe's going to say, because absolutely all of us, whether we're from different political parties, are facing these kind of challenges, those kind of conditions. And Britain will be better when we tackle all of those problems, even if we have different ideas about how you might get there. So over to Liz.
Thank you. It's hard to say when I first became politically engaged, but I do remember one incident when I was flying to Canada with my family on KLM. And I have 3 younger brothers. And I remember that my younger brothers were all given junior pilot badges. And I was given a junior air hostess badge. And this was in 1988, and I was so livid by that whole experience. And I think, I'd already sort of questioned some of the expectations of me as a girl, but that idea that even in the 80s, which we kind of thought were enlightened at the time, that could happen, that a company could give out badges like that was just, I thought, outrageous. And I think one of the things that motivates me to be in politics is that I hate being pigeonholed myself. I hate the idea that because I'm a woman or a girl, that there are only specific jobs I should do or there are only specific things I should follow. And that was one of the early motivations for me. And I think that's grown into seeing how much talent we waste as a country. And it's not just women's talent. Actually, we waste a lot of talent if you look at the difference in educational outcomes from which background you come from in this country. It's horrific compared to other countries. You look at the attitudes towards different ethnic minorities, women in general. We lose a lot. And I think what is very close to my heart is the idea that we need to liberate every individual person to fulfill their talents. And that's really why I got motivated. I have to say it's thanks to Liberal Democrats that I got involved in formal politics. I had a Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate came to my school when I was 16 and gave a talk. And he said at the time, anybody who's interested can get involved. And I actually received a focus leaflet through my door and rang up and said I want to help in the campaign. And I don't know how, my ideas about politics were kind of translated by that. But it was somebody coming along to my school, and I did go out canvassing for Liberal Democrats, and I joined the Young Liberal Democrats when I was asked to do so again. And I think what Joe said is very true about that. And became involved in politics. And I think once you get involved and you start campaigning and you start talking about ideas, it is such an exciting thing. I mean, it's such a thrilling job to have that you can, you know, it's difficult to get it out of your system, actually, I think, and I certainly haven't been able to since. But then I went to university. I will point out that I was growing up in North East Leeds, and my dad's a lecturer, my mum was a nurse and a teacher. I don't think I'd met a single Tory in North East Leeds, and you know, being a Liberal Democrat was the socially acceptable way of being right-wing in Leeds. And so that's why I sort of plumped for, you know, because I am a libertarian, I'm a classical liberal, I'm, you know, interested in individual freedom, etc., meritocracy. And, you know, I didn't really know any Tories. So when I went to university and I actually studied economics for the first time and became really interested in the idea of people having control of their own livelihoods. And also I met some Tories. I began to think, well, these Tories actually aren't that bad, and maybe I actually do agree with them. And, you know, in Leeds, the Tories always had a bit of a factor. And actually these Tories at Oxford are actually quite nice. So I gradually, while I was at university, actually with Joe's husband, I sort of moved towards the Tory party. And I think one of the things that I would say is that parties are highly social, and this is a critical factor. So what I felt comfortable with when I was in North Leeds was different from what I feel comfortable with when I went to university. And you meet different people, and that has a huge influence on you. And it was the people that got me involved in the first place, and people that helped me along in every way, actually, that I've pursued my political and other career. So, for example, I remember the interviews I did to get into Oxford University, and I remember the other candidates helping me with some of the answers and saying, actually, I've just been in, and these are the questions they're going to ask about who the former French Prime Ministers are, and here are the answers. So when I went into the interview, they helped me out. And it's just like that, actually, becoming a councillor or becoming a candidate. Although politicians are rivals, actually your friends in politics are incredibly important. And it's the sense of camaraderie you have with your fellow candidates and your fellow colleagues that really helps get you through the system. After university, I decided that I was going to, you know, get a real job, join the real world. I went to work for Shell in the oil industry as a commercial manager. I worked in sales. I was very interested in sort of economics, geopolitics. I thought the oil industry was very interesting. But I still had this pull towards politics. So I used to have big battles with my boss about taking time off to go to party conference. I stood to be a councillor at the same time. It was like, I kind of knew that business was interesting and important, but it didn't have quite the same thrill as politics did. So I was always sort of drawn towards politics, and that's why I decided to become a parliamentary candidate. I think by that time, I was so interested in it. I'd got my own motivation, and what I began to do was actually seek out people that could help me. So seek out friends that I could work with, seek out mentors who could support me, because as Joe, I think, was saying, often you don't get a lot of validation in politics. You don't get people saying you've done a great job or why don't you do this. So I think one of the answers is to just go out and find people that are going to help you. And one of the big supports to me in southwest Norfolk is Baroness Shepherd, who's my predecessor in the seat, and she often gives me good advice. She's been Education Secretary, so she can actually say to me, well, this is how you deal with this particular issue with, you know, civil servants, or here is how you handle issues of party management. So having people who've been there before and can give you advice is really, really important. What drives me in politics? Well, I think it's the challenge of it is very interesting. It's intellectually challenging, and it's also psychologically challenging, because ultimately you're dealing with people, and they're the most fascinating thing. And I'm motivated by a feeling that our country can do better. And, you know, I see around me things that aren't going as well as they should do. I think I can contribute to that. I think I can use my experience to help that, and that's hugely motivating. I think by the time that because I've fought 3 parliamentary seats. So I fought a seat in Yorkshire called Hemsworth, which is a former mining town. I then fought Calder Valley, which is on the Yorkshire-Lancashire border. It was a marginal. I got selected for that seat 3 months before the election. It was a marginal. I lost it by 1,300 votes, which was a pretty ghastly experience, because I was convinced I'd won all evening. And I think that's the other thing about politicians. They have this ridiculous sense of optimism, which is constantly dashed, and you're always incredibly hopeful. But then I got selected for South West Norfolk, and you do build up experience of doing selection meetings, of speaking to people. And I think a lot of it comes down to practice. Certainly in the Conservative Party, public speaking is very important, and your ability to speak confidently in public, which you can get experience in doing. So if anybody in the audience is interested in becoming a Conservative MP, my number one tip is practice public speaking a lot. That is a critical, an absolutely critical factor. Now, I did do it with young children, and there are issues you have to address with selection committees, but if you are committed enough, you can do it. And I get very frustrated by the idea that it's incredibly difficult. In fact, I'm very fed up with people in Parliament telling me how difficult my life is. So, for example, one of Stella's colleagues, who I won't name, female colleague, I had my 2 children with me in Parliament. She came up to me and said, "You mustn't see your mummy very often, do you?" And I just thought, thanks. And you do get the sort of, it must be incredibly tough to have 2 children. It must be incredibly hard. How do you manage it? How do you do it? None of my male colleagues get asked that question as much as I do. And I'm a fairly robust person who will slam back. But what concerns me is all the other people who are put off by that sort of constant drip. I don't think we've got an issue of overt sexism in this country. I think we've got a drip culture issue. And one of the things I'm very concerned about in my job is the lack of women doing science and going on to do science A-level and science degrees and I'm very struck by the similarities that women trying to break into the science world have from women trying to break into politics. I don't think it's a politics-specific thing. I just want to read you a quote, which is from an excellent article in the New York Times, that the realisation that women were leaving the profession because of the slow drumbeat of being underappreciated, feeling uncomfortable, and encountering roadblocks along the path to success. And I think that is true. I think it's a drip that we face. And I agree with Stella about challenging that when you hear it. Sometimes you can be so surprised when you hear it. It's quite difficult to come back, with an immediate riposte. But I think we all have to do that, because even if we're capable of withstanding that, and there's 3 people here who are pretty tough people, frankly, and have got to where we are by being like that, that's not necessarily true of a wider group. And we do, I think, have a responsibility to call those people out. I just wanted to finally say that you do hear a lot of negativity about how hard it is. I think lots of great jobs are hard. And there's nothing wrong with that. And why would you want to do a job that was easy? Why would you want to do something that wasn't challenging? I think it's a tremendous opportunity to shape the future of our country, to work with some of the most amazing people in this country, I get involved in everything from what's in the maths GCSE to how can we help the youngest children get the best start in life. What a fascinating job I've got, how lucky I am to have that. And I just want to make it clear to the audience, really, that there are really great opportunities about this. I wish we could get more and more women in politics. I think it would massively change the culture. If I compare politics and government now, it's rather like the shipping industry, where I worked for Shell was in the 1990s, where I was often the only woman in a meeting, or the only person on the floor. It was quite a Boise atmosphere. We're still like that in politics, and I think we need to change that.
Thank you. I think we've had 3 really, really interesting speeches, so I'll open it up to questions on the floor. There is a mic going round, so wait to get that before you say your question. Obviously, say who you are and where you're from. And if we could have questions rather than speeches, that's always good. So can we, just take it at the front first. And obviously there'll be some questions in the other room. I'm well aware of that, so I'll make sure. Oh yeah, there's a second room, yeah. Sorry.
Is that where all the boys are?
Okay.
Okay. I don't think this is... is it on? No, anyway.
I think so.
My name is Valerie Mocker, and I work... Hello.
Okay.
So my name is Valerie Mocker and I work for Nesta, the UK's Innovation Foundation. And my question concerns female behaviors. So as Joe already mentioned, there are certain types of behaviors that women show. So for example, that they don't go with their heads through the wall and kind of maybe are not as confident or as a bit hesitant to ask for promotion, to put themselves into the spotlight, these kind of things. And then there are other types of behaviors, for example, to be balancing out, to be more diplomatic, that in the business world are also considered as being more successful in kind of closing deals and these kind of things. But on the other hand, they can be quite negative. So for example, I think they did a study in Oxford about degree results, where they showed that women performed better because of these qualities throughout university, but in exams they performed worse than men because they were considered to be less confident and less knowledgeable. So what is the solution to this? I guess it's not that women should just behave like men, but in your experience, did you find that there were certain tendencies or maybe female behaviors that you wanted to overcome, or where you focus on behaving differently, and where there's some behaviors where you really thought this adds value and I should really keep this type of working?
I should have said we'll have 2 questions at a time, or 2 or 3, just to keep them moving. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Lorna Sutton. I'm an intern here at IFG, and just building on from that question, that there seems to be a focus on in getting more women in to increase diversity, but this is always done about women should push themselves more like men. So again, do you think that there's any structural changes? Do you think leaders of parties should be going through development goals and changing the whole culture entirely to encourage a broader range of people in general, not just women?
Okay, and we'll have a third, and just settle there.
Hi, my name's Olivia Neal and I work for a charity called Lennon Cheshire Disability. I'd be interested in the panel's views on, with the increasing use of social media, and I'm thinking probably particularly Twitter, what the opportunities are there for women to use that as a tool to help promote themselves maybe, but then also maybe some practical advice on how best to mitigate the risks that might come with that.
Okay, so we'll just do the 3 first. So with Twitter, structural changes for women, and do women need to act like men? And Stella, do you want to kick off?
Oh, thank you. I would combine Valerie and Ronnie's questions, because I think everything we have to deal with is the fact that there is a sense of what is a female behaviour, that there are somehow norms and expectations around women. This will be, I don't know, actually it might not be a point of disagreement on this panel. I was selected on an all-women shortlist. I'm really proud of that. If you think that was easy, you should have met the other 26 women I was standing against, because boy, they were impressive. But that was a recognition that there are a series of expectations, there are a series of prejudices that are within society, and that my political movement has those too. And we could either spend years and years and years of asking nicely, of asking people to look again at women and think they could do this job, even if they were softly spoken or perhaps had children, or we could say, actually, it is too important to us and who we stand for and what we represent not to change that. And one of the proudest moments for me was watching people like John Prescott advocate for all women shortlists and recognising that we were missing out as a political movement if we weren't representative of 51% of the population. So when we talk about female behaviour, when we talk about structural changes, that's why we have to have this as a conversation, not about women, but about power. The power to define what leadership looks like, the power to define the kind of person you want to represent you. Because then we stop thinking it's about a particular form of behaviour being gendered. Of course we're conditioned into certain types of behaviour. My background is in psychology, so I was looking at this. But actually, we have to change the frame of reference as to what this is about. Because it is about the diversity and what you miss out on from people, and then saying to people, when power is unequally distributed within your political movement, within our society, you lose out because of that inequality. What are you losing out on? How might that look different to you, and how do you know that you're making progress on that? What I would also say in my political movement is the idea that all women shortlists are the be-all and end-all, that they're the silver bullet, is not where we've got to. So of course, it's the starting point of a conversation that says, we recognise we have a challenge, we need to deal with it. I think I hear the frustration of women in other political movements, and I hear the kind of, and we see it again across business, across academia, across the military, this kind of, well, if we make the case, somehow those people with the power to define will be enlightened. Actually, we have to apply pressure too, because the idea we're going to keep waiting around. In 15 years, we've only made a 4% increase in the numbers of women in Parliament. So actually, if we keep waiting around, you know, when Joe's baby is born, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl.
No, it's right.
What, Martha? if it's a girl, she's going to be drawing her pension before we've hit parity. I look at my 2-year-old niece and I just think, I'm not doing good enough for you if I don't push harder and fight harder on this stuff. So challenging people's expectations is absolutely key, but challenging those people who think that women have certain types of behaviour is also key. In terms of Twitter, where do I start? Listen, that asking to have women on banknotes so that we could celebrate the idea that women had made a contribution to Britain's history and therefore could make contributions to Britain's future, generated 50 rape threats an hour to Caroline Criado Perez, and then the same thing happening to me and other women, tells you everything about how far we have to go. This is where I would possibly disagree with you, Liz, because actually I think there is overt sexism out there. I went last night to the Lord Mayor's banquet. The Lord Mayor is the second Lord Mayor we've ever had who's a woman, number 686, second Lord Mayor of London. I said that to the taxi driver. He said, oh, they haven't gone down that road, have they? About having a woman. And he said, oh, yeah. I'm just kidding. So that made it better. Twitter, communication off and online has the potential to bring us together for that cheerleading and calling out process. That's what we have to do. And we have to recognise it's not about the medium. Twitter makes it easier, but actually calling out people who are being sexist, cheerleading those people who are standing up for equality and saying it makes a difference to my life when you do that is the future. Yes, you will face misogyny online. It is completely unacceptable offline and online, and we have to call it out. And where it is illegal, we should be calling the police in. That people all said to myself and Caroline, well, just come off Twitter, or, just ignore them, learn to cope, rather than saying to those people, you know what, guys, you need to change your behaviour. Is the attitude that also frames our expectations about what women will behave like, how they will look, what really matters about them. We have overt sexism in society, we have unconscious sexism in society. Both hold everyone back.
Liz?
I wouldn't actually disagree with what Stella said. I think we're just using terms in a slightly different way. I agree very much that a lot of the issues here about different behaviours are culturally entrenched rather than something that is biologically there from birth. Absolutely, in terms of the way women and girls put themselves forward, all of those kind of issues, I think, are quite entrenched, which is why I think we need to try much harder to counteract them. But I'm not, we don't have all women shortlists in the Conservative Party. I think a better way is making processes much more open, transparent and meritocratic. I'm quite a big fan of primaries. I'd like all parties to do primaries so that we had a system where we had more open candidate selection. Because I think where you have all women shortlists, you end up with having, maybe, for example, having underrepresentation of people from low-income backgrounds. Or I just think there's a danger in trying to group people rather than open up and say we want everybody to have a good chance. One thing I think we do need to look at is the political backroom. There's a lot of focus on MPs and parliamentarians, but a lot of the power in party is exercised by the people who work in the leader's office, the people at HQ, all of those people. How do we recruit for those jobs? How do we talent manage in those jobs? It's not just about MPs, and I think we can become overly obsessed with the frontline politicians at the expense of those who work in the back room. I think there are strong cultural signals that we can put across. I was massively in favour of the hours change we put in place in Parliament, bringing things forward on Tuesday. I think it's had a positive impact. I think we could have an even more positive impact if we move towards even more sensible hours. The idea that you can't start till 11:30 strikes me as bonkers, and we should be thinking about how to better organise our Parliament. But it does send a signal. I'm very struck by the reaction of some of my colleagues who perhaps weren't in favour of it, because they don't like the way that things have changed. And I think it has made Parliament more professional, more focused, more of a working environment, which I like about it now. So I think other cultural things we can do like that to make things more meritocratic, to make them more open, are the way of challenging the culture we've got at the moment. Twitter is a difficult thing, frankly, as a minister, to do Twitter, because we're bound by collective responsibility. Essentially, every tweet you put out is like a press release, so you have to be very, very careful about what you say. I think it is a great tool for interaction, but it is just another medium through which we communicate, and the ideas don't change. The medium changes. I think it's a great way of engaging people better. I think it could be one of these things that drives a more meritocratic and open political process. But I think we've got a long way to go in that. I think there are issues with the government, but there's also issues with Parliament itself and the way Parliament is organised and operates that we need to look at seriously, because it's not as modern as it should be.
And Joe?
So, I mean, I agree that Valerie and Lorna's questions that have got quite a lot of crossover, because, I mean, we talk about sort of female behaviours, and obviously we're talking about broad generalisations here, but the socialisation is an issue. I mean, I'm struck when I go and speak to primary schools in my constituency, you know, 9 times out of 10, the first child to put their hand up to ask a question is one of the boys. It's not, I mean, you know, it should be something approaching 50-50, but it just isn't. There is something that we're doing to little girls that we're telling them to behave one way, that they'll be a good girl and, you know, don't shout out, whereas, you know, boys will be boys and they'll be robust. I mean, you see it on their clothes, you know, daddy's little monster, mummy's little princess. I mean, it is sort of everywhere out there. This is what your role is as a little boy in this world, and this is what your role is as a little girl. And then when you get to school, it's about asking questions, and then it's about who volunteers to stand up and make a speech or to go and do that science project. And we do need to be dealing with that all the way through. But because we have that sort of legacy, if you like, then I think we also need to be looking at sometimes how we can encourage different behaviours, which in the short to medium term might help us to get better diversity. And that's behaviours in terms of individuals within those systems, and that's also the behaviour of that system, if you like. So we shouldn't assume, and I think this is often the case, that the way things are is currently gender neutral, and that if we make a change, it's therefore some kind of special treatment for women. Because actually, if you have a system that's been designed around everybody being a bloke, then it's not necessarily gender neutral. It's just been designed around, you know, the way that blokes might like to do things. So if we know that there are some differences, that sometimes women might need that little bit of extra nudging or pushing or nurturing, then we should have, you know, whether it's in political parties or organisations, systems in place to enable that to happen, and to proactively seek out people and encourage them, where particularly we know that that's going to make more of a difference. But at the same time, yeah, I also think there's a place for trying to give a bit more confidence in women negotiating these systems to be that bit more assertive, not because it's the right thing to act like one of the blokes and that the men have got all the right answers, but because it might help us to achieve the result that we want. And so, you know, sharing your experience, and, you know, one of the things I did after I went and had my conversation with Nick and found out that it wasn't so bad at all, and actually, you know, I'd been quite worried about it and, you know, practiced what I was going to say, and it was perfectly fine to have that conversation. You know, I went and spoke to some of my female colleagues and I said, oh, you know, you thought about you know, going and saying what you'd like to do, and really just encouraging each other. I think that mutual support can be particularly helpful. I mean, on the social media, I mean, you just need to look at what happens every time question time's on. If you're a male panellist versus a female panellist, what will be on the Twitter stream. It's not just MPs, you know, sportswomen, academics, you know. Perhaps the one thing that can be said for it, and this is really scraping the barrel, but is that what was fairly hidden before, and that we perhaps managed to get ourselves to a situation of thinking that most people weren't, you know, that sexism perhaps was not such an issue, is that it is now there, you know, in print, on Twitter, on your screen, and you can see what misogyny still exists out there. And that's why one of the things that I sometimes do is actually just retweet some of it. And I find that kind of personally quite cathartic, and, you know, inevitably lots of other people realise, you know, what an arse the person that's tweeting that has been, and sometimes say so, which you know, always makes you feel a little bit better as well. But I mean, it's undoubtedly true. Women get this much more than men do. So there's an element of, just for your own personal sanity, developing a bit thicker skin, but also making sure that as Stella says, you know, when there's a crime that's been committed, that needs to be treated as seriously as if somebody had come up to you in the street and said it. And the thing is, they wouldn't come up to you in the street and say it, the vast majority of them, but they somehow seem to think that medium gives them license to do so. And so I think we do have a real issue with how do we deal with what is seen to be acceptable in the way that women are treated, and also for women and men to more collectively make a fuss and say this is not on, this is not the way that you behave. And I think particularly on social media, we're still developing cultural norms. You would be pretty appalled if you were standing in the street or you were, in a supermarket and somebody walked up to a random person that they didn't know and yelled the kind of abuse that you see on tweets. And probably you would find that people would sort of say, well, hang on a second, mate, you can't do that. But somehow we haven't developed kind of cultural norms that prevent that on social media yet. And I think that the companies themselves have got a role to play, and I think that all of the other participants on that social media platform also have a role to play, because we cannot let the misogynists win on Twitter, because that is a fantastic tool for people getting together and campaigning and networking and sharing, and you can create, as we have seen, a variety of fantastic campaigns, whether it was the banknotes campaign, whether it was the campaign against Facebook's images of rape, that everyday sexism was so involved in. It can be a huge positive force for change for women and equality in our society, and so we need to fight to make sure that can stay that way.
Great.
Can I just quick, because I just also want to come back and say that I don't think that all men are misogynists. But sometimes in these kind of conversations, we act like it's a binary choice between women not being heard and men thinking these things only, and it's revealed. And one of the things I feel very strongly about, as I say, is like the Bechdel testing, is the leadership that men could show. I have to say, one of the most depressing things I read recently, and I'm sorry, is George Osborne talking about how his daughter was really angry with him about the women on banknotes issue and berated him for a month. And he was explaining how he'd had to have difficult conversations with her, that it wasn't his decision to make. And I just thought, you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer. If you had said, you know what, as a man in our society, I want to celebrate women, that would have been such a powerful contribution to that conversation. Sometimes I think we don't empower men to say, as they would do offline, if they heard a bloke, well, actually, they probably don't here, because it tends to be when you're on your own, women, isn't it, that you get people kind of making comments about your arse and about your boobs and about what you look like and what you would do, and that's what everyday sexism is revealing. But if men hear it, when you retweet it, they're shocked. The next stage is just to say, and you know what, you don't represent me, mate. And I just wish some men would stand up for the things that and stand up for the power that they have in an equal society to say that this matters, because otherwise this remains a conversation that ends up being between all of us rather than society.
Okay. Yes, because you've been standing there, I'm very sorry.
Thank you very much. It's LSE. I feel I come from a different generation to some extent, because it's now 60 years since I can remember people saying to me, aren't you lucky you've got a big brother? I'm thinking, what are they talking about? But can I just say that I'm worried. I'm really worried, because I've been in public life for 40 years or so, and I've had to deal with it every step of the way, from you're not wearing a wedding ring, you really ought to wear a wedding ring and everything else. But the thing that has always bothered me is the fact that women have been completely programmed to think that they're the problem. And I've reached the stage now, if anybody says, oh, we're setting up a mentoring program for women, isn't that good? I say, no, it isn't. And I think I would like to say to the whole of this room, women are not the problem. There is no woman in this room that needs a mentoring program or needs to worry about their behavior. The problem is men. And I think what we should be doing is talking about men and their behavior, because it is that is preventing women from making progress. And I'm sorry I'm making a statement. I'd love to know what you all think about how we deal with the men problem.
I think we should ask a man to speak next. So.
Well, my name's John Yeoman, and I hope I'm not a problem. But may I mention two names which haven't been mentioned yet, Margaret Thatcher and Hillary Clinton. Because what I would be really interested to know is how did the panel feel about the fact that, no, Margaret Thatcher, she got to the top of the Creasy poll, and yet she's not really seen by very many people as an inspirer for women. Looking more recently, frankly, had it not been for a prominent African-American, in all probability we might well have a female president of the United States, and there's considerable speculation that Hillary Clinton might well run in 2016. So, what are the implications of the careers of Margaret Thatcher past and Hillary Clinton possibly in the future as well? Thank you.
Do we have anyone else from that room? Because I'm conscious that they're not getting much. Well, let's just go. Yeah.
I'm Anne Perkins and I write for The Guardian, and I very much wanted to ask in that area as well, which is how influential for you when you were considering politics was the way women were portrayed, women politicians were portrayed and reported from Parliament in shaping the way you thought about politics.
And can we just do one more, because so we get through? Okay, yeah, I think we need to come to the front.
I wanted just to ask the three of you. You clearly, for many women, you've made it. So you're there, and what women want to know is, how do you do it? In your daily life, do you say something to yourselves in the mirror to get yourselves out the door with all that potential public backlash, or the fighting in the Commons and the things that people see? They wonder, how do you do it? You don't have training as MPs. You don't get a lot of training as a minister. People say you need mentors, but what is it that you do to drive you and to become the people that you are and the jobs that you do today? And what would you advise other people thinking about doing your jobs to do to develop themselves to be the type of women that you are and that they aspire to be?
Okay, I think we do quite fast answers on these, because there's lots more questions. So women are not the problem. Thatcher and Clinton. How influential is the way women were portrayed, women when you were younger, and how do you do it? So pick any of those, I think.
Okay, I was going to start with Mrs. Thatcher, because I think she was a massive influence on me and a lot of my generation, particularly of Tory MPs. But I think the fact we had a woman Prime Minister when we were growing up, I mean, I was 5 when she got elected, and I remember being in a media studies class when she stopped, in 1990. So she dominated my entire sort of childhood and teenagehood, and I was kind of a bit of a secret Margaret Thatcher fan, because how could you not be? I mean, she was an inspiring woman, and I think, being in the north of England at the time, as I say, she wasn't very popular with my teachers and people like that. And I remember when I joined the Conservative Party when I was 21, one of my friends sent a postcard to my house revealing that I'd become a Tory, saying, "Liz, I can't believe you've become a Tory." And my dad read it and was just absolutely shocked that I would have joined this party of his sort of ultimate hate figure, Mrs. Thatcher. But I think she was a big influence, and I think to have got to the top, with what she, with the overt sexism that she faced, was an incredible achievement. Hillary Clinton, I'm also a big Hillary Clinton fan. I think that the next presidential race will be very interesting, and I think she did a very good job as Secretary of State. How do you do it? It's always difficult to describe where your motivation and drive comes from. I mean, I think, like Stella was saying, I had very motivated parents who told me I could do anything, and I think that's an incredibly powerful driver for somebody that they keep with me for the rest of life. I've got 2 young daughters. I'm constantly telling them to put their hands up in class and, study maths and all those kind of things. I don't know if it will work, but I'm working on it. I think you need to be brave and take risks. One of the things Joe was saying about women being visible in politics, I think is very important. You do need to be prepared to say what you think and take things forward. And I think there sometimes is a natural reticence, and you need to try and overcome that. So I challenge myself to do things rather than not do things. I challenge myself to say yes rather than say no, and not to worry about things, and particularly at this stage in my career, to try things. And better to risk failure than never to try at all. So that's a sort of internal dialogue I have with myself. I think I've sort of talked about, I hear what is said about mentoring, and there are things like formal mentorship programs which may work for some people, but I think a strong network is really, really important. I can't highlight that enough. Politics is a people business. Without a strong network, I think it is hard. And I think making friends, having people you can rely on. I mean, for example, in East Anglia, Norfolk and Suffolk, I'm friends with Chloe Smith and Therese Coffey, the other female MPs in the region, and we do rely on each other a lot. And I think that's really helpful to have someone you can call, when you do have a bad day, because all politicians have bad days. So it's recognising that the things that you need to get you through and being prepared to ask for them and being prepared to sort of metaphorically put your hand up, I think is really important. And things like, you know, if you think you need training, go and get the training. If you think you need, but politics as a career, you kind of drive yourself. It's probably more like being an entrepreneur than working in a big company in that way. So you have to be able to sort of take those next steps.
Jo.
Well, I mean, I would agree that women in their careers are not the problem. I think it's perhaps too much of a simplification to say the problem is men, because I think it's not, well, first of all, it's not all men, and secondly, it's not as if there's no women that are part of the problem as well.
Exactly.
Sadly. And I think that both women and men working together actually is where you get the solution, and where you can, you know, and we need men absolutely to be engaged in a key part of the solution in fixing this, in fixing the way that we have the structures and the organisations, and the way that we, you know, encourage women to do things, the way in which we encourage men to do things, because it's not just a gender thing. I mean, we're also missing out a lot of talent of men that are perhaps less macho alpha male type. You know, there's a lot of things that you know, some women might be put off by that also put off lots of men as well. So it is about diversity in its fullest area. I mean, on Thatcher and Clinton, I mean, I think we can fixate on individual women politicians. And I mean, I think, first of all, you cannot take away from Margaret Thatcher the fact that she was the first woman Prime Minister in this country was a huge achievement. And to do that actually as leader of the Conservative Party, arguably a much more difficult achievement in terms of the culture of a party that, I mean, the clue is in the name, it's about tradition and conserving things the way that they have been. And so I think that was undoubtedly of massive influence. And indeed, you know, for, you know, growing up in the 80s, that, you know, women could be Prime Minister just wasn't a thing. It was just, that's who the Prime Minister is, which in itself I think has power. But I kind of also slightly hate the way in which we, on any woman in power, that we sort of put the sort of burden on them of being all women, and that's what all women are like, in a way that we never do with men. We never talk about Bill Clinton and what male politicians are like, and that they must all be, you know, philanderers and so on, because that's what he did, and well, what do you expect if you have a man in politics? But in the same way that we do put that kind of filter on our discussions of people like Margaret Thatcher and Hillary Clinton, and you know, I think we'll be knowing that we've got so much more success when you can actually just recognise that women are not homogenous. You've got a massive variety. There's lots of different women MPs and parliamentarians who do it in different ways, because do you know what? You know, women are different, men are different from each other, and that is how it should be.
I'm going to let Stella cut in just because we're running out of time. Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, I wish we'd had the sweepstake I was thinking about having about being asked the Thatcher question. Because we'll know we're making progress when women who, yeah, look, we grew up and she was Prime Minister, but the fact that that's the only reference point people have for was this person a role model or influential to you as a woman in politics tells you everything about how far we need to go. What I think Kate is right about is the men who I think are problematic are the men who think we should be grateful. And it's the men who are like, hey, I think you should be equals too. Yay, we haven't used the word yet, I'm a feminist too. As though they deserve gratitude for it, when what they're doing is recognising there's a fundamental power inequality in society. Absolutely with Jo on the idea that when we open up this debate, there's a whole range of behaviours and we get away from gender stereotypes and a whole range of men who have different experiences and expectations as well that can be part of the conversation. But where I'm with Kate is the idea that this is for us in this room to solve. It's for women to think about their behaviour, women to push themselves forward, the kind of Sheryl Sandberg, it's all about you leaning in. Yeah, you've got to have colleagues who are going to hear you when you do lean in. I mean, this is a two-way process, and we have to be clearer about that calling out and challenging thing. That's why I'm a feminist. And I mean, Natalie, with your question, say I'm a feminist because I want young women not to be told what to do, not to be told there's a particular pigeonhole, a particular route path for them. Anne's point about what do you think about, when I thought about getting into politics, it wasn't because I wanted to change government, it's because I wanted to change lives. That's what's kept me going. That's what matters. And you have to have a healthy sense that it is not about you. Otherwise, this is show business for ugly people and you kind of drive yourself a bit crazy. As much as you know that people, I'm on Question Time on Thursday. I know people will judge me on what my hair looks like, what I wear, second to what I say, which will be different for how perhaps they might judge my colleagues. You understand, you see those, you call them out, and you cheerlead other people as they do so first. That is how we will get to 30%. The point is everyone in this room should care about 30% because it's the road path to 40, 50%. All the research shows it's not about us, it's about the ecosystem in a society that then generates equality and generates progress. So you are the answer, not us. But the more of you who get involved and the more men in this room who start not asking for gratitude, but asking how they can help and how they can be part of the solution, the quicker we'll get there.
Okay, I think we have to wrap up there, is that right? I'm assuming. Okay, well, can we just...
to go, actually.
Okay, all right, fine. Then I think we are wrapping up there. Thank you very, very much. I think that's really interesting. And we can continue the discussion.